midst of violent social upheaval, a voice ringing down from the mountains, a message of internal peace and the renunciation of violence.
La no discriminación y la no violencia.
Some hailed the rise of a new prophet, a healer. Others denounced him as a false messiah, a danger to youth, a threat to society.
The Silo movement became a movement that was seen as dangerous.
His followers persecuted, tortured, even killed.
The press did an incredible campaign saying that we were having drugs, we were having orgies, we were having I don't know which satanic practices.
His voice silenced, his words denounced and mocked. Yet somehow, this unpresupposing South American has touched lives all over the planet, from Mali to Montreal, from the poorest slums to the halls of power. Is it possible that this unknown sage really holds the key to an experience that could transform your life? He's a spiritual guide to millions of people all over the world. His ideas have given rise to movements and political parties. His social, literary, and spiritual writings have been published in dozens of languages. How is it that after all that, he remains the best-kept secret of the Andes? It's a story that began many years ago in a remote outpost high in the mountains near the border of Argentina and Chile. Today, thousands have traveled from the most distant points to join Silo not far from Aconcagua, the tallest mountain in the Americas. I'm here in the crowd, not only as a filmmaker, but also as one of many pilgrims from around the world who have traveled to this place where three great mountain chains converge. We have made our ways from Africa and the US, from every part of South America, from across Europe and Asia. All of this in response to Silo's message that our suffering and contradiction cause violence within us and around us, that creating internal unity ends that violence and produces the conditions for something new: peace, force, and joy. Imagine a spirituality that's not a religion, organizations of volunteers where no one is paid, including the leaders. An inspiration that for some has given birth to social action, for others political organization, and for many a spiritual path.
Hemos peregrinado a este paraje desolado buscando la fuerza que alimente nuestra vida, buscando alegría en el hacer y buscando la paz mental necesaria para progresar en este mundo alterado y violento.
Paz, fuerza, alegría. Paz, fuerza, alegría.
For some, all of this is very new. Others have come to join old friends and colleagues. My path to this place began when I was 20 and first came across Silo's writings in a bookstore in Canada. Others have traveled farther and longer. The first time Silo spoke here, the rocky landscape was unadorned by buildings. Those who came did so at great personal risk. The first time, no one arrived in such style. The authorities were even less welcoming. The situation was more complicated and more dangerous. It may not be obvious in what a tourist might see today, but by the late 60s, Argentina was being torn apart by military dictatorship, right-wing hit squads, left-wing guerrillas, and everything in between. The cultural and political upheaval of that moment wasn't unique to South America. Riots and insurgency, revolution and protest were the reality from Malaysia to Ohio. In that overwrought environment, stories spread down from the mountain of an extraordinary young man. Drawn by curiosity or hope, guided by rumor or intuition, they sought him out, looking for a healer, a guru, or a guide. By 1969, Silo was living far from the centers of power in a small stone hermitage that he had constructed some miles from the outpost of Punta de Vacas. Even here, in the isolation of the mountains, the local military would often disturb his meditations by taking pot shots at him, just for fun. In the midst of the social and political turbulence, word of Silo continued to spread, and after persistent requests, he finally agreed to leave his mountain retreat and speak to a group of people in the city. Though permits were granted, the crowds were arrested before the events began. It was a pattern that repeated until it was finally announced that Silo was certainly free to speak if he wanted to speak to the rocks. He was told that he'd be welcome to return to his hermitage and speak to all the people who wanted to join him there. On May 4th, 1969, the same summer humans first walked on the moon, despite the fact that it was so far off the beaten track, despite the frigid weather, despite the heavily armed soldiers, a few hundred pilgrims made their way to this distant place to hear Silo speak publicly for the first time. His words must have surprised those who came to hear a Messiah or a healer.
A escuchar un hombre de quien se supone se transmite la sabiduría, has equivocado el camino, porque la sabiduría no se transmite por medio de libros ni de arengas. La sabiduría está en el fondo de tu conciencia como el amor, está en el fondo de tu corazón.
The talk that Silo gave that day lasted perhaps 20 minutes.
Desconocedor de las leyes que rigen el universo,
It focused on the nature of pain and suffering,
desconocedor de las leyes de la historia,
the varied forms of violence, the relation between the violence inside of us and the violence around us. At the heart of it was the tale of a traveler who had lost his way, a story of suffering and pleasure, of need and desire, and the possibility of a profound change. And somehow, despite all the difficulties, his message spread, by word of mouth, by flyers and posters, by every means imaginable, even as a comic book. Silo spoke here 30 years later, in 1999.
Aquí estamos de nuevo.
It was then that the stainless steel pillar was raised to commemorate his first talk. He spoke here again in 2004, and then in 2007. But over all that time, his message has remained unchanged.
Y bueno, y es la ciencia y es la justicia la que puede mejorar el dolor humano. Pero el sufrimiento humano es mental. Y el sufrimiento humano no se soluciona ni por el desarrollo de la ciencia, ni por el desarrollo de la justicia. Es un esfuerzo que tiene que hacer el ser humano para entrar en otras regiones de la mente. Ese es nuestro tema.